Okay, here I want to explore a pretty simple idea that could be applied to many different situations. Not a particular one necessarily, but I will apply it in other situations in different videos, uh, maybe like rational functions, for example. So if we understand what I mean here, how really big or really small numbers dominate a product. First of all, this word product, I literally mean multiplication. So I'm talking about multiplying by really big or really small numbers. And so what do I mean by really big? I don't mean to sound uh, insulting or something, but really big means, and I hesitate to say this, but close to infinity or negative infinity, so positive or negative infinity. So when I say the number negative 1,000, I'm describing that now as being a really big number. Okay, for example, of course negative 1,000 is not close to negative infinity, but it's a big number. Okay, so the idea is there's no limit on how big we can get there. And then a really small number is similar. That's a number close to zero, a really small number. Okay, so I don't mean by big or small, I mean how big the number is. 1,000 is as big as negative 1,000. They're the same size. Okay, so that's what I'm talking about, the size of these numbers. So I'm multiplying by really big or really small numbers. So let's look at this. Let's say I have 1,000, some fixed number. So this is, I'll write it down here. This is just some fixed number multiplied by a really small number, or 1,000 times a number really close to zero. You can imagine that this is really small, something else really close to zero. Okay, so a fixed number times a number close to zero, and as close as we want it to be, is going to equal a number close to zero. Now realize that since these numbers here, the numbers close to zero or close to positive or negative infinity, could be positive or negative, you know, this thing over here could be a number positive or negative as well. And same thing with this really small number up here. For example, let's say I have 1,000 times negative 0.00000001. That's a number really close to zero, but it's a negative number. So you can imagine that this will be a negative really small number, another number that's really close to zero, even though 1,000 seems pretty big. Okay? The point is, when I'm emphasizing here how small this number is, and I can keep making this number smaller to make this number, the product of these two, even smaller. So if you multiply a fixed number times a number close to zero, you get a number close to zero, and it could be positive or negative depending on whether the numbers you're multiplying are positive or negative. Now if we take some fixed number like 2, any fixed number, and we multiply it by a really big number, then you can imagine that we'll get a really big number. And again, depending on whether these numbers are positive or negative, this could be positive or negative as well. Okay, so a fixed number times a number close to positive or negative infinity, just to emphasize how big this really is going to give you a number close to positive or negative infinity. Okay? So for example, if I take 2 times, let's say negative 2, that's our fixed number, let's say. Negative 2 times 3, 7, 5 with 10 zeros. Then of course what I get is a negative, I don't care what it is at this point, but it's a negative really big number, right? So here I'm emphasizing how big this number is, okay? And the idea is the number that's really big or the number that is really small, really close to zero, they can be as big or small as we want to make them. The other number remains fixed, okay? That's pretty much key here. And that's all I want to say here. So let me put a box around this for completeness. And I hope that makes sense to you. There are lots of interesting things you could do with this now.